In 1965, a factory worker in Pittsburgh named Frank Kowalski earned about $6,900 a year. That was the median family income back then. He worked at a steel mill, came home at 5 p.m., and his wife stayed home raising 3 kids. They owned a 3-bedroom house, they had a car, they took vacations, they saved money. All on one salary. No side hustles, no credit card debt, no panic about retirement. Today, Frank's grandson Mike works the same hours. He's a software developer earning $85,000 a year. His wife works too, pulling in another $65,000. Combined household income of $150,000. And they can barely afford a 2-bedroom condo. They have student debt, they're terrified about childcare costs, retirement feels like a fantasy. So here's the question that should haunt you. What the hell happened? How did we go from one income buying a house, a car, vacations, and a future to 2 incomes struggling to cover rent? The math doesn't add up unless something fundamental changed. And it did. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon walked into the Oval Office and made a decision that would quietly rob your generation of the same prosperity your grandparents had. Most people have never heard about it, and those who benefit from it would prefer you never do.
Before we go further, I need you to do something. Drop a comment right now. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to see how far this story is spread and how many people are just now discovering what was taken from them. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because what you're about to learn will change how you see every paycheck, every price tag, and every political promise for the rest of your life. Now, let's go back to 1965 and understand what your grandfather had that you don't. Frank Kowalski's $6,900 salary in 1965 doesn't sound like much, but let's translate it. His house cost $21,500. That means his annual salary covered about 32% of his house price. He could realistically pay off his home in about 3 years of gross income if needed. His car, a new Chevy Impala, cost $2,400. That's about 4 months of salary. A gallon of gas was 31 cents. A loaf of bread cost 21 cents. A dozen eggs, 53 cents. His dollar went far because it was tied to something real. Gold. Every dollar in circulation was backed by gold sitting in Fort Knox. The government couldn't just print money whenever it wanted. There was a limit, a constraint. And that constraint protected people like Frank. It kept prices stable. It meant his savings actually saved. When he put money in the bank, it didn't lose value. When his boss gave him a raise, it was a real raise, not just catching up with inflation. The system wasn't perfect, but it had rules, and those rules kept wealth within reach for ordinary workers.
This wasn't just America. In 1944, while World War II was still raging, the world agreed on something called the Bretton Woods system. 44 Allied countries met in New Hampshire in July 1944 and decided the U.S. dollar would be the global currency. Every other currency would tie to the dollar, and the dollar would tie to gold at $35 per ounce. It was a promise, a contract. If you held dollars, you could exchange them for gold. That promise kept everyone honest. The government couldn't print endlessly because foreign countries could call their bluff. If France didn't like how many dollars America was printing, they could demand gold. And they did. Throughout the 1960s, countries started exchanging their dollars for gold because they saw the U.S. printing more than it should. The gold reserves at Fort Knox started shrinking. By 1971, America had a problem. It was funding the Vietnam War, it was funding social programs, it was printing money to pay for both, and the world was catching on. France sent warships to New York Harbor to pick up their gold. Germany wanted theirs. Britain too. The system was breaking. America didn't have enough gold to back all the dollars it had printed. So on August 15, 1971, Richard Nixon went on television and said something that sounded boring but changed everything.
Nixon announced he was temporarily closing the gold window. Temporarily. That was the word he used. It's been over 50 years. That window never reopened. In one speech, Nixon severed the link between the dollar and gold. Money was no longer tied to anything real. It became what economists call fiat currency, money by decree, valuable because the government says so, not because it represents anything tangible. And here's what they told you. They said this was good. It would make the economy more flexible. It would let the government respond to crises faster. It would create jobs and prosperity. What they didn't tell you was who would pay the price, because when money is no longer scarce, when it can be created at will, something has to give. And what gave was your purchasing power. Let's look at what happened immediately after 1971. Inflation exploded. In the 1970s, prices doubled. The dollar lost half its value in a decade. Wages tried to keep up, but they never quite did. Your grandfather's raises stopped feeling like progress. They felt like survival. And that pattern never stopped.
Here's a chart you need to burn into your memory. From 1950 to 1971, wages and productivity moved together. When workers produced more, they earned more. The line was almost perfectly matched. After 1971, the lines split. Productivity kept rising, workers kept producing more, but wages flatlined. The gap between what workers created and what they earned grew wider every year. Where did that value go? Into assets, into things that benefit from inflation. Real estate, stocks, commodities. The people who owned assets got richer, the people who only sold their labor got poorer. Slowly, quietly, every single year. Let's go back to Frank and Mike. Frank's house cost about 3.1 times his annual family income. Mike's condo, even with two incomes totaling $150,000, costs about 2.6 times their combined household income if they're looking at a $390,000 place. Wait, that sounds better for Mike, right? Wrong. Here's what changed. Frank was one income supporting a family. Mike needs two incomes for less space. And Mike is making what should be considered a very comfortable salary. The real comparison is this. If Frank's wife had worked too, their household would have bought the house in 1.5 years of combined income. Mike needs both incomes just to stay in the game. Now let's look at it nationally. In 1971, median home prices were around $25,000, and median family income was about $10,300. That's 2.4 years of income to buy a house. Today, median home prices are $385,000, and median household income is $83,730. That's 4.6 years of income. Houses now cost nearly twice as many years of income. But here's the kicker. In 1971, most families had one primary earner. Today, that $83,730 typically requires two incomes. So a single earner household today, nearly impossible. The system didn't just make houses more expensive, it forced everyone into two-income survival mode.
After 1971, debt exploded. Consumer debt, corporate debt, government debt, all of it grew exponentially because money was now cheap to create. In 1971, total U.S. debt was less than $400 billion. Today, it's over $34 trillion. That's not a typo. $34 trillion. The government prints money and borrows it into existence, and when it does, the first people to get that money benefit most. Banks get it first. They lend it out before prices adjust. Corporations get cheap loans. They buy back stock. Executives get bonuses. Investors see their portfolios grow. By the time that money reaches you, prices have already risen. You get the inflation, they get the assets. This isn't theory. It's called the Cantillon Effect, named after an 18th century economist who noticed that new money doesn't spread evenly. It flows like water. The people closest to the source get wet first. Everyone downstream gets the runoff. You are downstream, and you've been downstream for 50 years.
So, was it a conspiracy? Did Nixon and his advisors know this would happen? Here's what we know. The decision wasn't made in secret. It was broadcast on live television. But the consequences were hidden in economic jargon. They called it modernization, flexibility, necessary adaptation. What it really was a transfer.
A transfer of wealth from savers to debtors, from workers to asset owners, from the future to the present. And once it started, it couldn't be reversed because everyone in power benefited. Politicians could spend without raising taxes. Banks could lend infinitely. Corporations could borrow cheap and grow faster. The only losers were people who relied on wages and savings. People like you. People like Mike. And here's the cruelest part. They convinced you it was your fault. They said you weren't working hard enough. You weren't skilled enough. You needed more education, more hustle, more sacrifice. Meanwhile, the system was rigged from the start. Not by evil masterminds in a dark room, but by incentives. Everyone acted rationally within a broken structure. And that structure has been in place for over 50 years.
Let me show you one more comparison. In 1971, the minimum wage was $1.60 an hour. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $12 today. The actual minimum wage now is $7.25 in many states. You're being paid less than your grandfather in real terms. But it's worse than that. If the minimum wage had kept pace with productivity growth since 1971, it would be $26 an hour today. That's not a left-wing talking point. That's math. You've been producing more, creating more value, and getting paid less for it. The difference went somewhere into shareholder returns, into CEO compensation, into asset prices. The wealth didn't disappear, it moved. And now you're told the solution is more debt. Student loans to get the education you need, mortgages you'll pay for 30 years, credit cards to cover the gap. You're renting your own life from a system that printed itself rich. So what do? You can't go back to gold. The world is too interconnected. The debt is too large. If the U.S. tried to back the dollar with gold today, gold would need to be worth over $50,000 an ounce just to cover a fraction of the currency in circulation. It's not happening. The system will keep running until it can't. But you don't have to be a victim of it.
Here's what your grandfather had that you need to reclaim. Assets. He bought a house not because he was smarter, but because the system allowed it. Today, you need to think like an owner, not a worker. Own things that inflate with the currency. Real estate, even if you start small. Stocks, especially in companies that produce real value. Commodities, scarce assets, anything that can't be printed. Your salary will always lag inflation, but assets rise with it. The gap your grandfather had closed naturally. You have to close it manually. Stop saving in dollars long term. Dollars are designed to lose value. Use them for transactions, not storage. Stop believing the myth that hard work alone builds wealth. Hard work builds income. Ownership builds wealth. And stop waiting for the system to fix itself. It won't. The people who benefit from it control it. Your power is in understanding the game and playing it better than those who don't know the rules exist.
So here's the truth. It's not a conspiracy in the classic sense. Nobody meets in a secret room to rob you. But the effect is the same. A decision made in 1971 changed the rules of money. It made your grandfather's life affordable and your life expensive. And the people who benefit from that change have no reason to undo it. They'll tell you to work harder, get more education, be more grateful. Meanwhile, they'll print another trillion, buy another asset, and watch it appreciate while your paycheck stagnates. You can be angry, or you can be informed. Anger without action is just noise, but information with action is power. Your grandfather didn't need to understand economics. The system worked for him. You don't have that luxury. You need to understand how money moves, where it goes first, and how to position yourself in the flow. That's the real lesson here. The gold conspiracy isn't that they took gold away, it's that they took stability, predictability, and fairness away. and they've replaced it with a system that rewards those who understand it and punishes those who don't. Thank you for watching. If this opened your eyes, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's see how many people across the world are waking up to the same realization. Share this with someone who thinks they're just not working hard enough. They need to know it's not them. It's the system. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Stay informed. Stay sharp. The game hasn't changed. You just finally know the rules.